Okay, I am redoing the lecture video from earlier this week because it turned black after a while because I made it go full screen and I didn't realize it would do that. Um, okay, so I'm just going to start from the beginning. We're going to look at U.S. economic trends in the 20th and 21st century. Your next presentation is due April 30th. And then your quiz, you have a quiz due. I'm recording this on Thursday, so tomorrow, but April 20th. 24th, my bad. April 24th. Um, so, in case you're worried about what you need to do for the end of the semester, here's a little checklist. I'll put this on Blackboard as well. Um, all reading review questions should be turned in already. If you're missing a couple, that's okay. Get them in ASAP. Uh, Friday, April 21st, 4th, you'll have your last quiz. Then April 30th, turn in your middle class policies presentation. Any of these, some of you may have already turned them in, but get them in when you're finished and get them in sooner rather than later because don't want to turn them in late. And then May 5th, I'll post your final exam, and it'll be due by May 8th, which is a Friday at 11 p.m. I'm going to change it around. You guys didn't like true false, so I hear you. I'm going to take out the true false and make it all fill in the blank and multiple choice. Another reminder, I'm teaching a physical geography lab class this summer. It's going to be online because of COVID-19. Learn a lot of cool things like how to identify local fossils and other fossils. Learn about weather, climate, land formations, our own local ecosystems, etc. So if you need a summer class or a lab class, sign up. It'll be fun. All right. We're going to talk about economic sectors and then why it has been a challenge to maintain a middle class in the United States as we've transitioned from a manufacturing based economy in terms of employment to economy based in jobs in services. All right, so listen to this. I updated the link. I've updated a couple things that didn't work on this lecture because I can't make it go full screen. So this explains how the middle class has really been created over the years. So there's been three chapters of middle classness, and each one was not organically made; it was created by politicians and by people themselves because you want a stable middle class. They are the backbone of your country. They are the populace that votes, and so they need to be educated. You want them to have good jobs and a good life so they don't overthrow the government. So those are some of the reasons why we want a middle class, but politicians diverge on how we maintain a middle class into the future. So please listen to this. Sorry, little NPR thing. Because one question will be on the quiz, and then there'll also be a question or two on the final from this. All right, economic structure. I'm going to go over this a little fast because students seem pretty familiar, or you're able to digest this somewhat quickly. So, primary sector is basic production, agriculture, forestry, things that come from the ground. Secondary, also called manufacturing, is construction and industry. The tertiary, also called the service sector, can be things like healthcare, someone that the bus driver, teachers, actors, people that cut your hair, check you into a hotel, those things. So primary sector, it's decreasing in developing countries, but it's still high. So a lot of their jobs come from things that are grown, things that are from the sea, things that are in the ground. In manufacturing or the secondary, more of this is coming from less developed countries than more developed countries since the 1970s. So think about, or some of those in-between countries, India, China, Mexico, places like that. And then developed countries like in the United States, in Western Europe, in East Asia, a lot of them have their jobs in services or the tertiary sector. So why is the tertiary more lucrative, more profitable, more money-making than the primary? Well, if you sell a service, like let's say as a teacher, I sell my knowledge, what's in my brain. It doesn't cost me anything except for to, in better times drive to school, or whatever investment I put into my education to get a degree. And then after that, I can teach anywhere. As long as I have my brain, I'm good. And because it's knowledge based and it's something we value highly, I can sell my worth, I can sell my capital, my skills, my service skills at a higher wage than, say, let's say you're a banana farmer. It costs a ton to get into farming or mining or fishing. You need a lot of resources to make that profitable. And then how much does, a banana cost at the supermarket? Or how much does a plank of wood cost? You need to develop it into something else, move it into the secondary sector and manufacture it or sell it in order to make it more profitable. Plus the primary sector is very vulnerable. The primary sector can, things like droughts, overfishing, that there's limited resources, and a lot of things could go wrong there. All right. Just another way to look at these, and you guys can go over all these slides on your own as well. I don't really think they need too much explanation. So primary would be like a miner, secondary, construction worker, tertiary, a nurse. And then they're also adding in the quaternary, and this is more like geography 200 level class that we could get into it. But quaternary is going to be highly specialized knowledge-based technological support. So a scientist, a professor, computer programmer. So they're the best paid and the most lucrative, most profitable, generally speaking, of the sectors. All right, so here's just an example of an underdeveloped country in Nepal, a BRIC or sort of emerging market with Brazil and then the USA, and how people work in what sector. So in Nepal, 81% of people work with the land or the primary sector, agriculture, mining, farming. Farming and mining are the same thing. And only about 3% in the secondary and then 16% in tertiary, so services. So providing things to people. In Brazil, the tertiary sector makes up about half, and then primary and secondary make up a quarter apiece. In the United States, the vast majority, so 75% of Americans work in services / also known as the tertiary sector. And then secondary and agriculture or primary, it makes up very little of our economy. All right. So industry and manufacturing is the secondary economic activities, and this was really the backbone of the American economy, American employment for most of the 20th century. So you process these raw materials from the primary sector and make them into finished products, and then you add value to them, because you can't, I don't know what to do with iron ore or with, a raw bit of lumber. But if somebody manufactures them into something I can utilize, and I'm just spitballing here, making up, but like a car or a refrigerator, then I'll buy it. And this began with the Industrial Revolution. So just to give you an idea of where we're going here, capitalism, pre-capitalism was kind of what were called cottage industries, literally named because people would work out of their homes, being, let's say, you made shoes or you made ale or you made, clothing, etc. Then the Industrial Revolution made it so we had mass production and mass consumption. And then another chapter of capitalism was Fordism, so think the manufacturing era of the United States. And then we have post-Fordism or globalization, which is from the 1970s till now. So just a reminder about the Industrial Revolution. It began in the 1700s in Western Europe, in particular the United Kingdom. Then it spread to the rest of Europe and the United States and Canada. It was a revolution because there was lots of new inventions being made that made it easier to produce things. And it also made farming, there was a lot of inventions in farming too, so that you didn't need as many people working the fields. So those people were put out of work, and then there was new jobs in the city. So we have mass urbanization of people moving in these particular areas, Europe, United States, from the country into cities looking for these jobs. There were plenty of raw materials or primary sector materials because of colonialism, and those materials were gotten free either through, because they colonized in order to get the resources, and then also through slave labor. But the big thing here was mass production of goods, mass production. and then building up a little middle class through mass consumption. If you mass produce something, the price is going to drop down. And so more people can afford to have more than one dress, more than one pair of shoes. The Industrial Revolution sort of changes in the United States, or in the American context in particular, with Fordism. So it's named after Henry Ford. It's a direct or indirect reference to him. And it applied to a national economy, so the entire United States. It was an encouragement of mass production and consumption, and he also made it his life's work to make the assembly line more scientific, more efficient, so you could keep prices down. You wanted to keep wages high and unemployment low, which makes sense to us. But what he really wanted to do is create a situation where your labor becomes your consumers. So he really changed things like offering the $5 work week, which was work day, $5 work day at a Ford plant. He changed things overnight. He doubled the wages for workers. And this took these jobs that were previously considered kind of like sweatshop condition jobs, low skill, low pay, and made them very important and valued, and even considered skilled labor overnight. So he did this because he wanted to attract the best workers. He wanted to keep workers because it's cheaper. If you've ever watched The Office, it's cheaper to keep a worker than to hire a new one. And also happy workers are going to be more efficient. They're going to make you more money. And then lastly, if you pay them people enough, you automatically create a market for your product. Your workers can afford what they are making. So Fordism is associated with not just the United States, but this was a question on your midterm, the geography of Fordism. Not just the United States, but what was called the manufacturing belt. So think the northeast part of the United States and the upper Midwest. That's not to say there weren't manufacturing jobs in Kansas City and St. Louis and New Orleans and Los Angeles, but this was really the heart of it. Then, starting in the 1970s, we really start to notice that this era is running out of steam. So, as you can see from this graph here, manufacturing employment was already starting to decrease, but it's just since 1950, the second part of the 20th century has really just showed a steady decline. Whereas Europe and the United States did a ton of manufacturing, now not as much. So what happened was the American laborer was getting paid the modern equivalent of $30 to $40 an hour, plus they had health care. They had pension plans, which would take care of them in retirement. And these were all fought for by workers. So they had really good jobs, but that made them pretty expensive. And after World War II, the United States did not have a ton of competition on the global scale because so many other developed economies had suffered during the war, and they had to focus on rebuilding their own infrastructure and rebuilding their own economies. But by the 1970s, they had bounced back, so we had competition. American workers were paid a lot, which was amazing if you were an American worker, but they were seen almost as a liability to, the Ford plant, to General Motors, to Carrier, various big companies. And the companies needed to stay profitable. So if you can't get cheaper inputs in terms of materials, then you have to find cheaper workers or other ways to stay profitable. So the idea was to move to other countries. So Detroit plant closed, Detroit $20 an hour. Then they moved to places like Mexico and closer by, or even the American South. But then those people after a while said, hey, we deserve better wages too. We don't want, to be inhaling bad chemicals that can cause cancer or birth defects in our children. So then they say, fine, we'll move to Indonesia where it's cheaper, and then to Vietnam. Something that's called the race to the bottom, where instead of workers having a lot of power like they did under Fordism, they now are kind of all competing against each other to see which countries can get global investment. Now, for Donald Trump, when he talks about MAGA, Make America Great Again, he is harking back to this time in American history when so much of our jobs were in manufacturing, and these were good breadwinner jobs. So one person could work at the Ford plant, make $40 an hour, and support a family on that income. Now, if you listen to this, There are some challenges to bringing those jobs back. So listen to this. It goes all the way back to 2016, but it's still present now. All right. So this is when Boeing, who makes airplanes, was laying off a ton of people. People were leaving the cities and looking for jobs elsewhere. So it wasn't an easy transition from Fordism to post-Fordism. Deindustrialization, the breakdown of America as the manufacturing capital of the world, as the factory of the world, was hard. Led to a lot of unemployment. It led to lots of people moving from places like Michigan, trying to find jobs elsewhere. It was a complete transition in the American economy. Now, on the bright side, people like, here we have Margaret Thatcher, the leader in the United Kingdom at the time, the Iron Lady. She said there's no alternative to globalization. A country's economy has to globalize or go extinct and become impoverished. Her American counterpart was the Republican Ronald Reagan, who said we need to get government out of the economy, let the laissez-faire, the free hand of the market do its thing, and that will lead to globalization, and that will lead to a better life for everybody. But they were focusing on these jobs, manufacturing jobs, turning into information technology jobs, so high-paying jobs with tech. And that did happen, but not as many jobs were created as they liked, or they are so highly specialized that you had to go to college for a long time and maybe accrue debt to get those jobs. What we saw instead was a lot more service jobs. And these service jobs, the workers within the United States, the workers did not have the power that they did previously. So people would have to work more than one job in order to make ends meet, or they would have a job, but it wouldn't offer, a retirement plan, or wouldn't offer health care, or they'd have to pay, you're a nurse now, but you pay, $300 a month in health care. So there weren't the benefits. They weren't as, the transition from Fordism to post-Fordism, from manufacturing to globalization, led to workers not having as much power in terms of wage growth, benefits, etc. All right. There was also a big geographic switch where people moved from places in the upper Midwest and the Northeast. So in 1970 to 1980, all of these states in green lost over 100,000 people. And so this became known from the manufacturing belt to being called the Rust Belt, because the businesses left and the people left and there wasn't a lot left. And they moved into what was called the Sun Belt. So think of warm places and then places in the South and the West. So Florida gained over 1 million people in a decade. Texas gained over 1 million people. California. Other states, maybe we don't think of them as sunny, but on the West Coast, Washington and Oregon, Arizona gained big populations. Missouri, we're pretty much even Steven all the time. All right, so outsourcing, it's when a company subtracts an activity that was previously done in-house to another firm. This was a way that a lot of companies started to globalize, was that they would either move their entire plant over, or more likely they would outsource. They would pay somebody locally. So Nike doesn't have its own Nike factories in Indonesia. They outsource and subcontract with somebody else. And this helped companies it was less of a liability for them. So if someone said, oh, you're running a sweatshop, they'd be like, well, no, we're not. We just subcontract to this other place. They're doing it. We have nothing to do with them. And then another big change here was there was a gender shift. So a job that was previously kind of thought of as being pretty masculine, like working on the auto plant in Detroit, when these jobs moved to Mexico or to China, they became feminized. So like they were thought of as womanly jobs. And that is to pay people less. Because in the United States, and very much so in other countries, you can pay women less than men. All right. So there's different ways of thinking about these, or different ways of thinking and categorizing these new markets that became kind of prominent during globalization, and think a little bit later, like 1990s into the 2000s. So one is at NIE. Be sure that you know what that stands for and where they're located. And then another one that I learned a lot about in when I was in college in the 2000s was the export processing zone. So they're very attractive to companies like Nike or Banana Republic or the parent company of Banana Republic and all them. So know what it is and why places or companies like Nike find them attractive. And then lastly, and this was one of your questions for this week, what's a maquiladora and where are they located? Here's a hint. All right, so during this time, even though workers made less money than they would have in the United States, or critics argue that under globalization, it's not good jobs, even in places like Mexico or China or India or Brazil. These jobs are still underpaying people. But it did lead to GDP growth, purchasing power parity in many countries. So China starts to take off, especially in 2010, but these are going to be, this manufacturing investment is, and don't think just like cars, think about in terms of manufacturing shirts, tennis shoes, things like that, iPhones. India is gaining in GDP over the next half century. Pardon me. United States, we're not doing bad. And then Brazil also a little bit. So this leads us to the tertiary sector, aka services. Again, so here we start to see the service sector really take off. Hold on, let's move this out of the way. And then manufacturing jobs really start to decline. And here's where it's kind of hot. Well, I guess it's highest right after the war, or after the war, and then right here in the late 60s, early 70s. So tertiary sector, services to consumers. So you can be a teacher, a doctor, work for the police or a fire person, a cook, bartender, driver, etc. Oh, this is not an American thing that I stole from on the internet. It's British. Guess they call them cookers there. All right. I want you guys to think now though, like, all right, what kind of job do you have if you have a job? Or what kind of job do your parents have? Can you think of anybody that works, do you know of anyone that works in manufacturing? What about farming or the primary sector? Almost everybody I know works in the service sector, but my father, my grandfather, they definitely worked in manufacturing. Okay, so back to the middle class. Another one of your questions for this week is, what is the middle class? What does that mean to you? So who is the middle class? There's no particular economic standpoint of the middle class. You can say median income, but there's some caveats there, and I'd love for all of us to have this discussion in person. But like someone that works on an oil drill, that's a manufacturing job. They get paid really well, but they may not have a college education. They got the pay, but some of the other stuff may not come into play. But in general, it's about things like, generally, when we think of the middle class, we think of owning a home, or at least being able to own a home, or maybe you choose to rent in New York City, but you could move to the suburbs and get a house if you wanted to. Security is a huge thing. You have healthcare that you can afford, and you have access to good healthcare. You have retirement security, so you don't have to work when you're 85 unless you want to. You can go on vacation. College education for the kids. The kids get things like, iPhones, nice shoes. You're able to not just survive, but to thrive. But you don't live paycheck to paycheck. The jobs can vary. You can work on an oil rig. You could be a teacher. But generally we think of people as being the middle class, as being the biggest class of Americans, and being, kind of just, having a little bit more than the basics in life. Now, when I was in graduate school, I interviewed a lot of people on welfare, and almost everybody thought that they were part of the middle class, despite being, you have to be under the poverty line in order to qualify for welfare. But they felt that their values were middle class. They just weren't making that amount of money right now. And then I haven't personally interviewed very wealthy people, but you'll see it that even people that make a lot of money, like $500,000, yeah, 500,000 plus a year, will consider themselves middle class as well. So think about why that might be. All right, we're rounding the end here. So since the 2008 recession, but it really became mainstream in terms of politics in 2016, there is this concern that the middle class in the United States is vulnerable and is shrinking. So we're losing the middle class, and this could lead to the generations that follow the baby boomers of being working poor or living paycheck to paycheck. So it says the size of the middle class has fallen from 1970 to 2010. So what I want us to think about is, how do we maintain American middle class even if a lot of the jobs out there so we've transitioned from manufacturing jobs to services, from the secondary to the tertiary. With that, we've lost some jobs that were considered breadwinner, high-paying, good middle-class jobs. So what do we do? We have all these service jobs. How do we make them pay? Or how do we make sure the ones that do pay well are accessible to more people? So here it says, Americans' paychecks are bigger than 40 years ago, but their purchasing power has hardly budged. So that's an important distinction. Yes, our paychecks are going up, but it's not our paychecks going up, our wages increasing are not keeping pace with the basics that you need. Keep a roof over your head, pay rent, buy a house, so shelter, food, college, things like that. So from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's job growth. There are jobs. And many Americans now, more than ever, are working not just one job, but 2 jobs or 3 jobs to make ends meet, to support their families, to pay rent. So the jobs that have the biggest amount of growth that will be available to people don't pay anywhere near like the $20 to $50 range that you would make working at the Ford plant. So here, I wish you guys were with me right now. I need someone to do the math real fast. Calculator. All right, so actually this is going to be a mess. I'm going to mess this up. 21,000 a year. Hang on. Tim? Yeah. Can you real quick figure out, if you make 24,000 a year, how much is that hourly? All right, we'll have him working on that. He's an accountant. All right. So in 2016, we have 2 people running for, we had a lot of people running for president, but the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton over here, and Donald Trump, they both started to argue that globalization is hurting the middle class in the United States. $11.50. Ooh, $11.50? Okay. So higher, so I said 24,000 a year. How much is that per hour? Higher than all of these, $24.50. Or sorry, not $24,000 would be $11.50 an hour. That's not a lot. All right. So they're saying the American worker is getting hurt. Stop exporting American jobs. Corporations, stop taking our jobs. So there was this focus on the middle class in every election, but especially in this election. And how can we help them? What can we do? What policies need to be put in place? Speaking of policies, hang on. You go away real fast. So, right to work. I want you to either Google it or look in the textbook. It says, what is right to work? In short, right to work is a way to make it harder to unionize. And the pros, people would say, is larger firms want to go to sites that are right to work states. Why? Because they would say unions are too much red tape. It makes it less efficient to do business. Others would say unions protect workers. So they're trying to get one over on workers by going to right to work states. So here are various right to work states in the United States. The red are right to work. And then I got this map obviously from a right to work, a pro right to work site, because it says forced unionism state. It's not really forced unionism, but Missouri, this has been on our elections for a couple years now. We have voted against right to work. I see it all the time on the highway with guys with like hard hats or union guys saying right to work is wrong for Missouri. It's basically about whether or not how easy it is to try to organize as workers for your rights or unionize. All right. So some politicians like Donald Trump, they say make America great again, and we need to return to these manufacturing jobs. It's tough though because a lot of these manufacturing jobs that do return to the United States, they can't pay that $30 an hour, or they won't. So they're paying less, or they won't offer the benefits. And if you listen to that little NPR segment, that it goes over that. So for Donald Trump, mainly him, but other like he was kind of the first person on the Republican side to really critique globalization. But his idea is that globalization is hurting American workers because we're doing bad trade deals that make it easier for places like China and Mexico to do business, but hurts the United States, and that immigration is taking American jobs. Other people, like Bernie Sanders, who ran for president in 2016 and this year, just dropped out a couple weeks ago. And then here's our little Justin Trudeau. He's the Canadian Prime Minister. They also critique globalization, but they're saying trade deals hurt not just Americans, but people in other countries as well. And because they do not prioritize sustainability of the environment, they don't prioritize worker rights, and that it's not immigration, it's the corporations themselves that are hurting workers. So here's Bernie saying, the fact of the matter is that there is a war going on in this country today. And I'm not talking about misguided and unnecessary war we waged in Iraq. I'm talking about the 40-year war against the American middle class, so since the 70s. A war against the American standard of living and the American dream of owning a home, sending kids to college, and having a secure retirement. Okay, so why does this matter? It's really the brunt of this is going to affect millennials and generations after that, unless we do something about it. So millennials, if you look at the census information I posted in the lecture, millennials and your generation, if you're kind of in the 18 to 22-year-old range, are less likely to own a home. They are more likely to live with their parents till later in life, like till 30. They're more likely to be in poverty, which is not good because young people, especially if you do not have children, should be the least likely to be impoverished. You're going to make less money, possibly, be more in debt, but also better educated. So, eek. It also means in the United States, our median wealth is declining. We think of ourselves as the standard bearer of a high quality lifestyle, of the American dream, of middle class, but we're actually number 27 in terms of median wealth. So that's not good. We want to have a high median wealth. That's one way of taking the pulse or the temperature of a country to see how well it's doing. So think about, how do we get these service jobs? So what we have right now is a lot of service jobs. Do we try to make those pay more? Do we try to make those more lucrative? Do we try to bring back manufacturing jobs? Here's one oh no. Meh. Okay. Oh yeah, there you are. Come here. Come back. Come back. This isn't going to do it. All right. Well, hang on. Let's see if... Okay, here it is. So food and beverage... So these are jobs vulnerable to layoffs during COVID. Are a lot of service jobs and a lot of low-wage jobs. So like automobile services, and these are services, not making the cars. They're like, people that... your mechanic, essentially. But supporting the accommodation services, clothing and retail, food and beverage, education, travel, of course, sports, entertainment, real estate. These are all service jobs, and these are all the ones that are the most vulnerable to layoffs during the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are jobs that are vulnerable to being lost. And a lot of them, again, are lower wage jobs. So you don't really, have that savings that you can dip into to survive. All right, so I want you to really, and because this is super important, I want you guys to really just, I hope, take a moment and think about what solutions make sense to you. So some people say we need to have a $15 minimum wage. That will help. Just like when Ford made the manufacturing jobs more lucrative, better paying, we need to do the same thing. We need to improve the wages so that they'll keep pace with things like rent and groceries, etc. Other people might say, bring back those manufacturing jobs, bring back those good jobs. Others might say, we need to make education more affordable with less debt so people can get STEM jobs and the higher paying service jobs. Others might say, if we had things like free healthcare and affordable college, people would be able to live on less money, lower paying jobs like being a teacher. So just go ahead and think about that. All right, so turn in your quiz tomorrow. I'm going to have a short one of these little lectures on Tuesday to kind of talk you guys through your final presentations and the exam, and then we'll do the same thing on Thursday. All right, have a great weekend.